We'll now move on to the VMware vSphere Distributed Resource Scheduler. This name sometimes gets confused with the vSphere Resource Scheduler, which is what runs on your hosts to schedule time for virtual machines to run on the physical processors. The vSphere Distributed Resource Scheduler is about managing the resource availability across the cluster as a whole, and it monitors how your virtual machines are running on each host, and if it determines that they will perform better on another host, it will move them to the other host to effectively balance out the load across all your hosts, so you don't end up in that situation where you have lots of virtual machines running on one host and causing a performance issue. It does so using vMotion. So when one of the hosts is overloaded, it will use vMotion to move the virtual machine to another host. So you need to have vMotion configured and working before you enable DRS. There is also storage DRS, which does very similar things, but for storage rather than the hosts. So we'll take a look at both of those, and starting with DRS. So we'll edit our cluster, go to settings, and there we are, vSphere DRS. Say edit, and we're going to turn it on. Now the automation level, this is the first thing you're going to want to set. So fully automated, when it detects a performance issue, it will move the virtual machines, and also when you power on a virtual machine, before it actually completes the power on, it will decide which host is going to be the most appropriate for that virtual machine. So if one host is a little bit more loaded than the other, it will choose the less loaded host. Partially automated, it will generate recommendations for running VMs, but won't actually migrate them until you tell it to do so. It will, however, automatically decide which host a virtual machine should be on when you start it up. And manual, it will just generate recommendation. It will not actually take any actions whatsoever, and you will have to manually accept or decline its recommendations. So we'll leave it in manual for now. The migration threshold is just that, how aggressive is it? Now, something to understand, if you bring it right down to the conservative level, then DRS will only apply recommendations that must be taken to satisfy cluster constraints, such as affinity rules and host maintenance. So with DRS, we can say this virtual machine must, or we prefer it to run on this host, and this virtual machine we want it to run on another host, or we want to separate these virtual machines, or we want to keep them together. So in that most conservative setting, less frequent vMotions, it will only apply recommendations if there is one of these affinity rules has been breached. For example, two virtual machines that should be kept together have been separated for some reason. It will only take action then. But if there is actually a performance issue, it will do nothing. If one of your hosts is loaded to the brim and the other is doing nothing, has no VMs on it, it won't take any action whatsoever. It will only perform a migration to satisfy a rule, or if you put a host into maintenance. That's the other thing that this will do. If you put a host into maintenance, it will move the virtual machines off that host onto your other hosts. Without DRS, if you attempt to do that, when you put the host into maintenance mode, it will sit there and wait about 10 minutes for you to manually move the virtual machines. It will not move the virtual machines on its own without DRS. VM distribution. Now, by default, DRS will not necessarily evenly distribute your VMs across all of the hosts in terms of the quantity. For example, let's say you've got 3 hosts and 2 of your VMs are doing a lot of the work. vSphere DRS may end up putting more VMs on one of your 3 hosts than on the others because of that slight imbalance in the amount of work that each VM is doing. By ticking this, you will tell DRS that you want it to evenly distribute the number of VMs across all of your hosts. That could stunt DRS, but it does reduce the number of VMs that are affected by a host failure. CPU overcommitment. DRS by default will not allow you to provision more virtual processors in your VMs than you have physical processors in your underlying hosts as a total. Now, as we'll see on the performance management section of the course later on, CPU overcommitment is not really an issue. Some people claim that it is. However, that is an unfortunately unhelpful rule of thumb. I know a particular UK business that runs on a ratio of 6:1 for their physical CPUs versus their virtual CPUs. It depends entirely on the workload and how you manage the resources within your hosts. Scalable shares we'll look at a bit more depth later when we come to resource pools. Power management. Now, distributed power management is a sub-feature, if you will, of DRS. Imagine you've got 10 hosts all running at the same time, but actually it's perhaps a VDI platform where each virtual machine is a desktop for a logged on user. So during the day from say 8 AM till 6 PM, you've got 8 to 10 hosts that are fully loaded. But after everyone's gone at 6 o'clock, you've shut down all of those VMs and you've got 7 hosts there that are doing nothing. Distributed power management allows you to move all of your running VMs onto a smaller number of hosts and power down the hosts that you are no longer using. And then when those hosts that are left over start getting busier at 8 o'clock the next morning, you can start ramping up and bringing online the other hosts. And that will, of course, reduce the amount of power you are using. And in your data center, it could reduce cooling requirements as well and other benefits to doing that. I've got to be honest, I don't see that very often myself, but that is there and you can do that if you wish. It does require you to configure in the hosts your out-of-band management card. So if you're using Dell, that would be DRAC, Dell Remote Access Controller. On HP, it's known as the ILO, or the Integrated Lights Out Management. And then in the advanced options, you can add in some additional configuration parameters based on either recommendations from VMware support or knowledge base articles that you find on the VMware site. So what I'm going to set for this demo, I'm going to set this to fully automated. I'm going to leave it on the default threshold. I'm going to leave predictive DRS off because, of course, that requires vRealize Operations Manager, which I haven't deployed. And I'm going to leave enable virtual machine automation on. And that is now complete. After I enabled DRS, we can see in the tasks here that it actually decided to move my machines around. So if we take a look at our hosts and the VMs tab, we can see Windows 10 there on one and vCenter on the other. I'll just mention here these VCLS VMs that have been added automatically on my hosts. This is a brand new feature in vSphere version 7 update 1. And these virtual machines are automatically deployed onto the hosts within your cluster, and they allow the functions of DRS to take place agnostic of vCenter. So it's moving towards removing a little bit of the reliance upon the availability of vCenter. Now you can't disable those, they are a mandatory feature of vSphere 7 Update 1. If you are on vSphere 7 and you install the latest update, you'll see these VMs suddenly appear. You can put it into retreat mode, in which case it will remove those VMs for you, but DRS will cease to function. Now, I don't expect that to come up on the vSphere 7 exam, certainly not the Foundations exam, because it is such a new feature, and in fact there's not a huge amount of information out there about it at this moment in time. So I would say ignore those. If they do come up in the exam, you know roughly what they are. We go to the cluster and onto the summary tab. We can see here cluster services. Cluster service health is healthy. So that tells us that those virtual machines, those VCLS virtual machines are there and working and are happy. It can also go to a degraded state if one of those VMs is shut down or deleted or is otherwise unusable. And it can then go to a failed state, in which case all of the VCLS VMs are down and DRS can no longer do its job. Don't touch the VCLS VMs at all. Let the vSphere cluster services manage it themselves. Don't increase the RAM, don't change any of the settings on them, don't shut them down, don't delete them. What should happen if you do happen to delete or shut them down by accident, the vSphere cluster services on vCenter will automatically recreate and or restart them. So just ignore them, leave them to do their thing. I'm now going to pop one of my hosts into maintenance mode. So enter maintenance mode, OK to that, and OK. We're going to watch, and you can see immediately it's migrating my Windows 10 virtual machine to the other host. So that is because vSphere knows that host 1 is going into maintenance mode and it needs to get the VMs off there to satisfy that requirement. This happens right the way from the most aggressive to the most conservative setting in DRS, as I mentioned, but it also happens at all of the other levels in between, of course. If we take a look at host 1 now, we'll see there's no VMs on it. And if we take it back out of maintenance mode, there we go, that's now back out of maintenance mode. It won't move those VMs back straight away until DRS runs and detects a performance issue. There we go. Now it has detected that imbalance and is migrating the virtual machine back to host 1.